So I think it's been an interesting maybe couple of weeks, months, where this topic comes up, and we've talked a little bit about suicide and suicidal ideation in the past. We always try to do at least once a year, focus on some of the very specific mental health issues that we know whistleblowers deal with. As they go through these cases and these transitions. I was going to try to share slides today, but for some reason, when I come to my share screen Windows tabs, it's not one of my options. So I'm going to forgo doing that today. But what I can do is just kind of talk through some of these issues, and Betsy will monitor the chat for me as we go along. And I think, we talk about the CDC data, the Center for Disease Control data, and what is the average leading causes of death in America. Well, suicide has remained with and without COVID in the mix, has remained about the 10th leading cause of death in America, with 49,000 Americans who die each year by suicide. So, and out of those deaths, over 47,000 are working-aged adults between the ages of 25 and 65, which makes suicide the fourth leading cause of death among working-aged adults. So with a rate of 18.9, while the overall rate for suicide in this country is 14.2, with, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, with the military being a little bit higher. So that's about one death every 11 minutes to suicide. And then, of course, we have over 12 million, almost 13 million American adults who have seriously thought about suicide, and 37 million who have actually made a plan for suicide, and 1.5 million Americans who have attempted suicide. And what else all the data shows us, that our high-risk groups are white males, veterans, and people living in rural areas. So very specifically, though, related to workplace deaths, there is definitely an increase in that data as well that the Bureau of Labor and Statistics tracks. So we have two different groups providing us with suicide data, and the correlation to the workplace, one is hard to measure. The factors are sometimes unknown. Culture isn't necessarily measured. And then you've got people teleworking, and then these other outside influences. So how is the workplace an important factor here? Well, we know from working with whistleblowers that there are real signs of a toxic workplace culture. That can be things like absenteeism, people just don't show up, what they call presentism, where people show up, but they're slow at getting tasks accomplished. And then there's bystander behavior, people who know things are wrong, but take the I see nothing approach. Ghosting, just like we've talked about ghosting in dating and in relationships. Employees are ghosting their employers, so they just leave. They don't even turn in a letter of resignation. They just don't show back up for work. High turnover rates, injuries on the job, and stress-related conditions, complaints and grievances are all increasing. The fear of reprisal, we've just been working on a research project, and we looked at about 127 research studies that all mentioned fear of reprisal as it relates to whistleblowing. And the lack of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace, and now even the targeting of those things are things I see as becoming more and more problematic. So then factors that are very specifically related with suicide and this hostile work environment are this toxic culture, the discrimination in hiring and promoting, underpaying, overworking, burnout and stress, harassment, bullying, actual violence and assault, sexual assault, and then the retaliation. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about moral injury and organizational betrayal. And then, as most of you know, I have what I call the toxic tactics of retaliation. I won't get into all of that tonight, but I've crosswalked how those tactics and the diagnostic and statistical manual that we use for diagnosing conditions, we can crosswalk some of those definitions to conditions that cause mental health crises, and then how that relates to diagnosing retaliation and PTSD. I know that in other trainings, we talk a lot about, well, what are the warning signs of suicide? And those things are sort of that exhibiting noticeable changes in behavior, mood. Somebody who's sad becomes maybe quiet, or even if they're happy. And now all of a sudden, somebody who seemed very depressed, all of a sudden seems like they're manic and they're happy, and it could be because they've already made a decision and have a plan. They're neglecting work, appearance, hygiene. We've talked that excessive absentee, presenteeism, voicing helplessness and hopelessness, feeling like a burden, not only at home, but also in the workplace. Imposter syndrome. We talk about that feeling like you don't belong, that you've got your job, but maybe you're just not credible. And a lot of times with whistleblowers, we see that as the result of the gaslighting that they're experiencing. Blaming coworkers or the organization, increased confrontation and adversarialism. All, again, another aspect of somebody who is really starting to decompensate. And then the actual documenting this, the filing the complaints of bullying, retaliation, discrimination, harassment, or even corruption, but being ignored or feeling very ignored in the workplace. Making direct statements about ending their life to coworkers or other managers. Indirect comments, such as, what's the point of my being here? What's the point of all this work? It's meaningless. No one here would miss me, and if I'm gone. And one of the things we've seen is people who will say things like, if you find me dead, it wasn't suicide, like trying to plant the seed that it might be more acceptable if they were murdered rather than if they died by suicide. And I was having a conversation with Dr. Michael Baden, who is the forensic pathologist. He's been on the TV show Forensic Files. And he said to me, he's never had a family say, oh, it must not be a murder, it was a suicide. But families who go through suicide always want to look for, no, this was probably a murder. It never happens the other way around. And so talking about death, no matter how it is, or included in social media, are definitely warning signs that somebody's got suicide on their minds. And then, of course, if they're giving away possessions or information about their projects, they're trying to pass on what they might know or think about what's going on at work so that the work can continue without them. And then finally, asking about things like life insurance policies, details, changing who their beneficiaries are, particularly being interested in cause of death payments and some of that, because there was a time where death by suicide wasn't covered by insurance or wasn't covered by the government for the military. And then, of course, ruminating about end-of-life matters, making a will, funeral preferences, which under normal circumstances are good things to do. But when somebody is suicidal, it could be a real sign of their suicidal mind. So those are just some of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of setting the stage, what the big picture conversations have been when we've looked at suicide from a surveillance perspective. But what I want to transition the conversation to tonight with Glenn and Mike, who have volunteered to join the conversation and talk a little bit more about what their experiences are and what they've been doing. I think it's an important opportunity for us to hear from some people with some lived experience, and then with some research that is going on right now. So Mike, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask you guys first, let's just do a quick round of introductions. Mike, if you'll introduce yourself, and then Glenn, if you'll introduce yourself, and then I'll come back to some of the questions I have.
Of course. Hello, everyone. Name is Mike Sobey. Kind of dropped a little bit in the chat about myself. I served in the Coast Guard and was medically retired from the Army. I guess I got lost on the way somewhere and ended up in another service branch. In the Army, I was a forward observer, but there were several levers that pushed me into the field of psychology, particularly trauma and suicidology. Everybody kind of says I got more dead friends from suicide than the war. Well, it's kind of true. And while in the Army, I started working on policy and analysis under 1st Armored Division's General Office and Headquarters. And everything kind of just evolved from there. And throughout further research, I found inside the U.S., like inside the federal government, there are a lot of levers at work that cause degraded mental and emotional health. And I started working on some policy, some of which has been introduced in Congress. Some others are currently working through the Senate. And currently I research the effects of non-operational occupational stress, particularly focusing on the British Army, as in the summer I'll be starting my PhD at King's College London. And here in the United States, I focus more on the general trauma and suicidology and how military service intrinsically causes trauma and leads to poor mental health outcomes. Glenn?
Over to you.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Dr. Garrick, for having us. I'm Glenn. I am a USMC veteran. In fact, I was talking to Mike yesterday, and he is kicking around where I was stationed back in the day. He mentioned one of the camps that I'd frequently go to that I hadn't thought of that name of in 20 years. So yeah, very, very small world. I was in the position that I had to report my commanding officer when I was in the Marine Corps. Went through that cycle of identifying the problem, becoming the problem, being hazed, trying to fight back a little bit, so on and so forth. And it wasn't as bad as many whistleblower cases, but it was something that I saw was wrong, tried to fix it, and went through what whistleblowers go through. After service, I went to college, graduating from Virginia Tech, and made my way out to Silicon Valley, San Francisco area, doing software design. For the last 10 years plus, I've been a product designer and user researcher at a big tech company. I really love software. I love usability and accessibility and seeing ethics applied through software. For a long time, I've been volunteering with groups like Signal or the Calyx Institute, Distributed Denial of Secrets, of which I now serve on the board of advisors. It's another 501c3 that publishes and archives hacked and leaked data in the public interest. We bring a lot of ethics and without any baggage of other similar groups from the past. And now I'm working on my own nonprofit trying to do software for whistleblowers. It's a platform called Hushline, and it's a thing where anyone can come and sign up for free and have an end-to-end encrypted Tor-ready tip line without having to own your own hardware or DIY your own server, or we do all the technical stuff, and it's just a typical SaaS product. And we're trying to bring a business model into the nonprofit space and see what good we can do there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more as the evening continues. Thanks, Jackie.
All right. Well, thank you both. I think you're both doing such interesting things, and I wanted to bring sort of some different ideas to this conversation as well. Most folks know I have sort of my own ideas about what to do with some of these workplace-related injuries, but I wanted to dive in a little bit because, Michael, I know you're doing interesting research. If you could share a little bit more about what's going on with the Brits and what you're doing, I think this would be an interesting way to kick us off to the next level.
Of course. So this research project is examining the non-operational occupational stressors and the mental health outcomes on the British Army.
In English, for everybody who's what is non-operational?
So I was getting to that. So a non-operational occupational stressor is anything that is not directly related to your primary function or job. So I was a forward observer in the Army. Anything that does not involve that job, that includes all the administrative paperwork, PT in the morning, driving to and from appointments, meetings, that would be considered a non-operational occupational stressor. And that also includes everything outside of the work environment, including your interpersonal relationships. So your dating life, your marriage, if you have kids, family issues, financial issues, things like that are your non-operational occupational stressors. Mm-hmm. And this idea was basically boiled down from the grand idea that military service intrinsically causes trauma due to the way that military members are trained, where the stick is used much more than the carrot. You do your job well, you don't get a cookie, but you mess up one small thing, you really hear about it. So boiling that down to this topic is going to allow me to continue to expand on that theory of military service intrinsically causing trauma to some degree, because trauma sits on a spectrum. It's not necessarily, when we talk about PTSD, a lot of people think, somebody getting blown up in Iraq or Afghanistan, combat trauma. Right. Trauma can literally be being yelled at by your boss, or it can come from a relationship with a significant other. It can come from hearing about something and feeling nervous that could happen to you. And the reason PTSD is diagnosed for every type of trauma is because it is our only diagnosis for trauma. And what might be traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you, and vice versa. It's just a matter of how the individual is inoculated to that stress and in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And so just to add, my soapbox is we think of trauma very much from the physicality standpoint. When I've been in court on whistleblower cases, I've been asked, so was the person punched, slapped, kicked? And if the answer is no, they're like, well, that can't be PTSD because they weren't assaulted. There was no injury. And so the idea that moral injury, which I'm going to ask you to talk more about too, that moral injury and that betrayal of trust and that broken compact between whether you're an employer at a bank or a soldier in garrison, there's got to be that bond, that trust. And when that trust is broken because of this toxic command climate or toxic workplace, those aspects of that injury, and that's why I said earlier, I can go to the DSM and pick out things that identify what is emotional abuse, the hazing that I think Glenn mentioned, stalking, intimidation, being yelled at, being denied access to resources, being denied access to basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter, being ostracized and shunned. All of those things are moral injury that I do think relate to PTSD and trauma. So Mike?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So moral injury. Moral injury is a really fun discussion these days in the psychology world, because it's not necessarily considered a thing yet officially. It's a subclinical term, much like the term neurodivergent. It's subclinical. It's describing something. On the spectrum of moral injury, what we can see from current research and opinion in academia is a moral injury is very bespoke to the individual. It's very personal. It involves morals, ethics, and values that boil down to something you did, something you failed to do, or something that you witnessed. And an example in today's climate, especially inside the federal government, is 30% of the federal workforce are veterans. 30% have come from the military and decided to continue their service as a civilian government employee. And over the past year, we've seen a lot of people let go from their positions. So that would be an example of a moral injury of a veteran saying, I want to continue to serve, but now you're just going to fire me. Because the institution said, we care about you, we're going to take care of you, but now we don't need you, pound sand. That could be morally injurious because of the intrinsic institutional betrayal, because you have upheld this government, these ideals, and now you're being cast to the side. A more extreme case is what we are seeing currently out of Israel and Palestine. There have been widespread reports in mass of IDF soldiers reporting with morally injurious symptoms based on the actions that they have taken, witnessed, or failed to prevent, which have led to the deaths of individuals. That's a more extreme case. So moral injury is very complex, and it basically boils down to the individual and how they and what their worldview is. What might be morally injurious to me is not morally injurious to you, and vice versa. That's where the complexity of it comes in, leading into what, at a clinical level today, we are understanding as complex PTSD, where it's not just a singular event that has formed the symptom clusters, it's multiple events over a period of time.
So I think the next thing, and to bring Glenn into the conversation, is really a little bit more about the coping and how are employees, veterans expected to deal with this. Let's talk about moral injury from that standpoint, and that betrayal of trust from your institution or your organization.
Sure. I mean, I can come at this from a couple different angles. I think that, I mean, it just depends on how you respond to that trauma. For me, I'm a little hard-headed, and when I was hazed, I was like, I'll just push back a little bit more and I'll report this guy for now hazing me, and let's just see how far I can go this way. And saw it as like, I don't know, just like a rationalist, like, I'm going to get out in a few years, like, screw this guy. I can put up with as much as they can give me. And not, other people that I, at our command at fast companies in the Bay Area, they were hazed for something where they were made to like sleep out in a tent, 3 people in one little, shelter half for a few days, and it was cold, and their command actually did get in trouble for that. Nothing happened in my case. Another story is a very good friend of mine who was deployed. He he was sitting in an internet tent and a mortar went through the roof, did not detonate, and buried kind of next to him. That and other kind of similar things. And this is someone that I grew up with, who I encouraged to go into the military, whose family I'm very close with, and I talk to his mother frequently, especially then. And recently she shared, he's a very good friend of mine, and I don't see the warning signs. It's just a big blind spot for me. And his mom was like, he's struggling with PTSD. Can you just talk to him? And I was so happy that she did. And he's on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast. I was over there, and like when we were face to face, I talked to him about it. And it's tough these days for like men to be in a situation of like crying in front of each other, but like him being able to be heard or seen, and me being in that position to be that for him was very special. It's just, and it was honestly, it's nothing that I would be able to identify as like, this is a warning sign. He's always been quiet type of thing. So I see it expressed in many different ways. And the things that has worked for me has been community, and just kind of trying to have a larger picture of the whole situation, of it being kind of like just like a weird political interpersonal thing when it does happen, and it's hard for it to be reflective of the entire system. And anyway, just trying to like think through it with people differently. But I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but
No.
it happens in so many different ways. And I also have tech, moral injury stories that I can share too. But
Yeah, so and Tia's asking, is moral turpitude the same as moral injury? I'm not sure I'm familiar with
I can take that one, Jackie. I was actually
but I was going to ask you. Good. Jump in.
Well, it's easy to kind of draw that conclusion. They are two separate entities. Moral turpitude is going to be it's going to refer to the legality of an action, whereas it is inherently immoral or depraved, and that's going to be culturally based heavily. Whereas Western culture is not going to share the same as Eastern culture for certain actions or treatment of others, persecution of others, that one could see in, take the Rwanda genocide as an example. One side, this is not heinous or depraved. The other side says it is. We as the West say genocide is. So that's where that would come in. Moral injury is definitely more on the psychology side of the house, which is going to explain how morals tie into emotions and the psychology towards events for the individual, not the society.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And just as a reminder, we're getting to the halfway point. And this is when we usually start opening it up for more discussion and questions. If you haven't introduced yourself in the chat and wants to make some connections, please do feel free to put your name and email address, or ask any questions in the chat as we kind of go through the next round. We are always inviting people to join us and participate in this discussion. So, and as we give people a chance to do that, my theory has been that when you cause a moral injury, there should be a responsibility that organizations have for that, just like any other disability. If I always use this as an example. If I fall off a ladder and I break my leg, everybody knows that I fell off the ladder and I broke the leg, and how long it's going to take me to heal, and what might be my long-term impacts of falling off a ladder. But if I'm a victim of moral injury, and I have PTSD. I've got now anxiety, panic attacks, depression. I think it's harder to know what to do with me next, and how do we rate that as a disability? So I was thinking we could maybe think about that for a minute. What would be sort of the advice or ways that Mike or Glenn, either one of you, think we could move this needle to making sort of this mental health, this emotional abuse, this parity where this has been lacking?
I'll do a quick handoff to Mike, and then or you, Jackie. But Mike, I'm in a position of being still in technology, where in the conversations that I've had over the past decade, there's a big tension between tech and policy. Policy moves too slow, tech moves really fast. Once you add policy for something, people are going to find a way around it, no doubt. That said, as thinking about how do we help whistleblowers, it especially from the technologist side, we have a platform. We have to do more than just have a platform. How do we then provide additional financial support or other types of things for whistleblowers? But ultimately, I think that it's a policy thing. How do I convince Google to publish a whistleblower address in a private way around their campus so that all their employees can have a direct and anonymous and encrypted line to legal or the state attorney general or something like that? Like, it's an uphill battle, and it's just not going to happen. In my experience, it's not going to happen until we get policy that says this has to happen. And I think that that's where I in my own future would like to see more attention. And I'm so encouraged that Michael and Jackie have been focusing on that area. So I'll just hand it over to Michael.
Yeah, Glenn, pretty much, what you said is true. Policy needs to be changed. That's really the only way to compel any compliance is through policy, but it needs to be common sense policy. For example, the DoD has initiated a lot of efforts for suicide prevention, intervention, and the like. However, it wasn't really taken seriously until the Brandon Act was made policy under the National Defense Authorization Act, saying that if a service member requests a mental health evaluation, it will be treated in a certain way and it will be completed. But the language of the policy itself, of course, it's the government, so it's vague, will be completed within a reasonable amount of time. Well, that's pretty subjective to who you are, what reasonable constitutes. And furthermore, there were no levers for accountability involved. So failure to do X, Y, and Z is met with, oh, well, you didn't do it, our bad. We just didn't train you properly, or there's no punishment mechanism involved. So what that is currently one of the initiatives I'm working on with a few senators is to put in a accountability mechanism there, because policy can be written, but without teeth, it's just a dog barking. There needs to be some bite behind it. And then from organizational levels, we need to kind of understand the legality of how, especially in the government, an organization is structured, where, especially inside the DoD, there is a custodial relationship between command teams and the individuals under them, because they intrinsically control their pay, where and when they sleep, where and when they eat. There is a custodial relationship there. And we can stretch that a little bit further into the generalized civilian workforce of the federal government, where if you read the fine print, they can send you to Syria if they want. If you want to keep your job, you're going to go. So they can compel compliance through financial means to send you to austere environments that, are just generally not in your scope or working conditions. That is part of an agreement to be a federal employee. You will work. We're sorry. But they do have, of course, the pay structure, scales, RDOs, and all of that fun stuff and benefits. But there is also a custodial relationship when you're a government employee. So the organization as a whole needs to be held accountable. This is, that's where the Congress comes in, passing laws that do have accountability mechanisms. And from the lower echelon levels, organizations need to do away with stigma behind receiving mental health care. One of the big reasons people don't go, and this is the most common I've heard in a clinical setting, is that their clearance will be affected.
Mm-hmm.
But today you see these influencers on your Instagrams or your Facebooks or whatever talking about, I'm in the military and I go to behavioral health. Well, you're kind of protected. You got a lot of people following you, and if they pulled your clearance, how would that look? Like, you have a voice. But the average soldier sitting in Fort Bliss, Texas, goes to behavioral health, their clearance can get pulled and nobody's going to care. Example, that happened to me. I had a TSSCI, and after my best friend died, I went to behavioral health. I got a talking to from our intel guys saying, yeah, your clearance is gone. That's news to me, guys. I thought you didn't pull security clearances. I felt a little sad and depressed because my best friend's dead. But nope, there goes the clearance. So looking at policies.
Supposed to happen, by the way. There was policy from ODNI that said you couldn't pull somebody's security clearance unless there was, like schizophrenia, lack of judgment, and reality testing.
Right, and nobody cares. So that's where we need to start looking at. We need to start looking at where we can make the changes ourselves. This is a, no one is coming, expect to self-rescue kind of deal, where from organizational levels, directors can make policies, they can make changes, they can encourage things, they can provide protective factors against people who are seeking help and somebody wants to give them grief about it. The person who can lay down the law, say a division commander, so a 2-star general, a brigade commander, a colonel in the government, your SESs, your GS-15s, your team leaders, they can take the stand at that level and encourage a better climate for mental and emotional well-being. Mm-hmm. And it'll just trickle through the organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I've often thought that gaslighting and mobbing can go two ways, right? It could be for good instead of bad intentions. And if we could bring the lived experience voice, like what Glenn was saying, you bring that voice into the workplace and people are listening and hearing, you break down some of the isolation. Because I think Glenn, you mentioned earlier, it's hard for whistleblowers, to find each other. And even in military, where you're supposed to be stoic and are trained not to, don't show emotion, don't say anything, don't be sad. If you've got this one set of rules telling you, don't say anything, don't look any different than anybody else. And even with with whistleblowers, if you've signed an NDA or you've taken a settlement agreement, you're not supposed to talk about your case, or there's an OIG investigation and you're not supposed to talk about your case, and you talk about your case anyway, well, then you risk your whole case falling apart. And, they warn you not to, don't talk, don't share. And yet the good guidance from mental health is have a peer support network, have social interactions, have community, have support. And yet we set up people by giving them these conflicting messages too, I think is makes it even harder to own your own narrative and be able to have those kinds of conversations, because you just don't know what's right or wrong. Or you do know.
The problem also is that everyone thinks that they're doing the right thing, right? Like the company thinks that they're doing the right thing for investigating this person or for eliminating the threat, the insider threat. And I think that one of the truths is that if you give an employee, especially an executive, a metric to optimize for, they're going to let all the other metrics slip. Mm-hmm. So, if you say, zero lawsuits for your executive team. That's the thing. That's what you like. Are you going to get your bonus? Are you going to get your contract extended or not? Type of thing, So I think we have to change the priorities.
Mm-hmm.
We have to. There has to. We talked at Workplace Promise Institute of, or maybe it was in Chicago, of like, what about whistleblower retention rate, and having that being a high metric, that we need to shoot for in order for something to happen for that company or whatever. We need to have different leaders proposing different things, because I think what we see is that actively in the government, whistleblower protections are being rolled back in all kinds of areas. And I don't know what it'll take, if someone's going to come to save us, or if we have to save ourselves. I am encouraged by some of the things in the news, in terms of people, I think, fighting back a little bit and some progress politically. I don't know what the answer is, except to always be conscious and trying to like continue to do the right thing, And one of the things that I'm encouraged by is that most whistleblowers that I've come into contact with have been able to find a very meaningful next job or part of their career. So, doing the right thing, while it might not pay off in the area that you've done the right thing, I think it can pay dividends in lots of other areas. It's just tough to get there.
Yeah, and that's part of the stress of the transition is how do you see the other side? And how do you repair your brain too? I think there's a neurobiological aspect to this as well. I'm thinking about Jennifer Fraser's work. Her first book was The Bullied Brain, and then The Gaslit Brain is the one she just did. Is that barrage of stress, I think, has an impact too, and that transition time. I am seeing where whistleblowers do, in many cases, go back to work, but when we surveyed people, it was about half were still chronically unemployed or underemployed, and with many who had opted for the self-employed route or gone back to school as a break, as a reset for their brains, I think, and then maybe a different profession or needing to move on so that they can have that reset.
So Jackie, can I bounce off of that real quick?
Yes, please.
So stick with me on the thoughts. So Glenn was speaking, and the two words I got out of that is conflicted messaging. You seek help, you're punished for it. You don't seek help, it's a detriment to yourself, and the outcomes can be catastrophic. So the federal government is the only employer that has the right to discriminate in the country. So case in point, every military service branch can separate a service member against their will for being diagnosed with an adjustment disorder. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know what an adjustment disorder is, I'll boil it down to something very real easy. It's made up. We all have adjustment disorders. I prefer the term disordered adjustment, because if you gave me a checklist on how to adjust to something, I'd go in order. An adjustment disorder is a way that clinicians can describe your symptoms and develop a treatment plan, and furthermore, bill insurance. It's a blanket diagnosis that 1/3, so according to the Defense Health Agency, about 33% of military members are diagnosed with an adjustment disorder, yet they can be separated at will by their commander. Kind of odd. So conflicting messaging. I go to behavioral health, get diagnosed, I get kicked out. Federal employees, somewhat of the same thing. There are more protections in place, though, where
used to be.
But federal employees can still come under scrutiny and pressure for going to therapy. They can experience bullying, ostracism, harassment, be viewed in a negative light by their chain of command, as it were. And it can just become a highly subjectively toxic environment for that individual. And moving with that to how do we kind of undo the damage? Mental health is health. And once you are injured, you're injured. It's like breaking an arm. You can break your arm, we can set it, put it in a cast, it'll be fine, you'll have full function of it, but something will always be a little bit different. You know, you might know when it's going to rain or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it's never going to be the same. And what we would be trying to do is remap everything. So like neurological mapping, more commonly, the term is going to be neuroplasticity. How do I change your brain kind of as close to where it was prior to the emotionally injurious event? And there's a lot of techniques out there. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically just gaslighting yourself, in my opinion, but it is evidence-based, it is proven, it does work. Acceptance and commitment therapy, accelerated resolution therapy, EMDR, stuff like that. They're all EMDR, still kind of working on the evidence there, but there's enough to say it does work. And there is no one modality of care or treatment that we can say is the end all be all. It all comes down to the individual, because if you come into my office, I'm the therapist. Yes, we have these symptoms. What caused these symptoms? Okay, what caused that reaction though? Humans learn through trauma. There's good trauma and there's bad trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago Cubs winning the 2016 World Series. Good trauma for me. I had fun. Go Cubs. Years prior, Steve Bartman catching the ball. Yeah, bad trauma. But it's how we learn. It's how we are informed about the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
So to the point of whistleblowers not returning to work, not being able to continue to work, having struggles reintegrating into a new work environment, that's partially because of trauma from their past work environment and their employers. They sign up to do a job. I'm going to do this job. There's the institutional betrayal, which causes trauma, which in turn could cause serious trust issues. They won't be able to integrate into their new teams. They won't be very pleasant to be around in the office. They'll isolate. All of these are also warning signs of poor mental and emotional status, which can lead to morbid ideation or suicidal ideation as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'll just jump in and to say, yeah, when I first joined my last big tech company, I asked permission to go to the bathroom on my first day, just because it just felt like a weird environment, and there wasn't a lot of freedom there. And I also, in certain executive meetings, would kind of sit there and observe and listen and not talk all that much, which was also not appreciated from the rest of the people in the room. There were just things that it was hard to smooth that transition, and there were no resources. There should be resources, and there are in theory resources, but there were no accessible resources available to me, and I definitely saw that and felt and continue to feel some of those incongruencies in the workplace. There's something else, but it'll come back to me. I wanted to mention.
No, I appreciate that. And I've been seeing and scanning the chat. I appreciate that people are sharing a little bit about their own experiences and just their own journey, because this is a journey, right? And we call them transition periods, not endpoints, because we're always moving forward and looking for something else. And Mike, I appreciated the descriptions about some of the treatments, because treatment does work. I think maybe not always the first time, and maybe not in a day. So it might require a bit of a stick-to-itiveness and some commitment. But there are definitely things that do help. I did put in the chat earlier the 988 number and 211 as phone numbers that are there to help people when they're having trouble coping or when they're looking for other resources that can be beneficial to them. So I appreciate that as well. Glenn, you look like you
The thing that I
remember
was going to
what you were
say,
saying.
the thing that I was going to say is what has helped for me as I see my truly, I kind of see my life as before and after my SSRI. Before, and I can't say, if the military was the sole thing that added to my anxiety, it definitely did, but if it was the only thing, that's that I wasn't able to identify it. And during COVID, having a little more time, I prioritized my mental health a little bit more, started going to therapy, and got on this SSRI. And I am very vocal about it with people in my family, the friends that I mentioned earlier, because it was like so significant that it's just something that I have to be vocal about. And I've seen some folks it helped them as well. And I think it's hard maybe for veterans, maybe for people in general to accept that kind of help. I think that there's a certain stigma around medication, um, depending on maybe your age or where you come from geographically. But just as a word of encouragement for anyone who's listening or might listen in the future, that it really helped me in a significant way that I cannot overstate.
No, I thank you for sharing that. And I see Rob's got his hand up. So I'm going to let him ask a question. And then I do want to talk about family. You brought up a good point.
Well, I was just going to comment on what Glenn just said. And it's fantastic to hear that he's had such a good outcome. And there are many people with the SSRIs and other antidepressants. However, being vocal is great, but you have to be careful, because I've also seen there can be, if you give it to the wrong person, it can also lead to severe problems. And those, you can, hyperaggression. So basically they're activators. And for the right person, like you sound like it was perfect. And there's quite a lot of people that benefit like that. That's fantastic. But bear in mind, you got to be very careful in your diagnosis. You got to pay attention to how those people are actually doing those medications, because it can go seriously sideways as well.
Yeah,
No,
I appreciate you saying that. And I was also going to say, a little tongue in cheek, but not really, other types of drugs like psychedelics and, controlled studies for MDMA or psilocybin or ayahuasca is becoming a thing that everyone's talking about. Those are, even marijuana, like I've seen not good things happen with people, with that, really not good things. So definitely, yeah, that's a very good point. Like, don't just do it because it seems like a great idea. Know your own condition and talk to someone who knows before you jump into any of these specialized treatments.
Yeah, I've always said that we have a real mismatch in encouraging help-seeking behavior and help-offering behavior, and how we match those things up. And I think that these are really the need for that individual treatment plan. Like, you have to really feel vested and comfortable with whatever your plan is. And that's everything from, I'm gonna be a hard-charging whistleblower, to, hey, you know what, my health and my family come first, and I need to put my own life vest on before I do anything else. Any answer is okay as long as it is about taking care of yourself first, because you can't save the world if you're drowning. And I talk to whistleblowers all the time who are struggling. They're maybe losing their homes, they're getting divorced, they're having problems with their kids. That's why when you mentioned your family and talking to your family, I thought, we always try to bring that family conversation into this, because none of us go through any of this alone. Family comes with us, whether it's elderly, aging parents who are relying on us as caregivers, or if we have young children at home or spouses. There's always somebody in our world that we are obligated to. And and making sure that they understand what's going on with us, I think is an important part of that journey too. So I appreciate you for bringing that up. Oh, I see Florida has a hand raised. Did you want to also talk about the family dynamic?
Yeah, but it's not a very positive matter to talk about, because sometimes certain family members would be the adversary, that they would be the first person to basically kill us. So in my case, my dad would kill me if I do the same, but somehow as the life, how it turned out, he died first. So my mom is on my side, which is thankfully she is not against it, but she is in an adversary nation that can be used against me as a leverage if such information is found out. So I have to carefully navigate through this particular situation, and at the same time, without even finding a lot of organizational support, some legal framework is supposed to protect me. On the other hand, turn against me, then I have to find a way to get rid of them first. Like, I'm worried about the CCP agents. Probably 2 of those showed up in one way or another. The FBI told me FSB is not going to get me anywhere close because I live way too remotely, so that's not a good thing. But a lot of stupid Americans, lawyers, greedy companies, they showed up first and become in a very hostile situation. And I realized the mechanism of the law is not very effective to protect whistleblower from them.
Yes, and that's part of I think what Glenn was saying about really having to know who's really on your team, because you're right, not every single family is as supportive as every other family, and there are all those minefields to navigate. And that's why I say you have to be doing what's best for you first before you try to take on all these other systems. Bali, I see you have your hand up too.
Yeah, I actually had a question because I was listening to what Michael was saying about the military being able to just dismiss people because they had gone for counseling. What is the interaction between the military and the Americans with Disabilities Act? Because at least in the civilian world, people with disability, any kind of disability, whether it's a mental health disability or a physical disability, have certain legal protections and the right to like reasonable accommodations. And if you can still do your job with reasonable accommodations, you can't just, at least theoretically, you can't just, fire people. So are military people not covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act? Or is it at the discretion of the commanding officer? They get to decide whether, they're going to discharge you, or I'm just curious because everything that I've read reflects what Jackie said about talking about it is like the most healing, helpful thing, and that peer support was the most useful thing for military veterans with PTSD. And if you can't do that because you're afraid of getting a bad personnel record or being discharged, that's so toxic. That's so contrary to what seems like it would be helpful.
So it's to answer your question, shorthand, the United States military, the Department of Defense, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the United States Coast Guard, are the only entities in the United States that are allowed to discriminate for hiring and retention purposes. You have to pass a physical. You have to, a lengthy physical at that now, in order to join. If you break your leg and you develop a limp, they can separate you, because at the end of the day, if you're non-deployable into combat at the discretion of the commander and medical professionals, you serve no purpose in that organization. And that's where a lot of institutional betrayal and morally injurious events come from, where you went through a bunch of stuff just to be separated because you were diagnosed with an adjustment disorder. I don't have the regulations in front of me, but every service branch has a regulation that states if you are diagnosed with an adjustment disorder, the commander can separate you. So it's the commander's discretion, And oftentimes it's accompanied with a opinion from a medical provider. However, it is the commander's discretion. They can separate you, they can retain you. And this raises a lot of ethical questions for providers and the military as a whole, where an adjustment disorder is generally resolvable within 6 months, but they can separate you immediately for it. So without, in my opinion, without allowing time for treatment of 6 months to see if it resolves, and if not, you shift to a differential diagnosis, because now it's not necessarily an acute issue, it's a chronic issue. I think that it is ethically not right. It's wrong. Ethically, it is unsound and just wrong and belligerent for providers to be okay with that. But because it is the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard under DHS, it is the command's purview. They can move to separate you.
Because I think airline pilots, all right, there was some sort of change with airline pilots where if you're just taking an antidepressant, you can remain a commercial airline pilot. And that used to not be true. Like there used to be some sort of issue where you couldn't remain an airline pilot if you were taking an antidepressant. Jackie, I don't know if you know anything about this, but I vaguely remember reading something like that. So it sounds like there was some growth in terms of understanding that somebody could be a perfectly functional human being and be taking an antidepressant. And I guess that hasn't made it to the military yet, or hasn't made it to the right people in the military yet.
So I think what Mike is saying, and I think this is an important point to highlight here, it's the command discretion piece. Because I've seen soldiers stay on active duty and cycle through alcohol and drug rehab 11 times. But if the command likes them and wants them on active duty, they get to stay on active duty. But if they've deemed you a troublemaker, they can separate you with an adjustment disorder. And we see that happen like with, especially with women who report sexual harassment or sexual assault. Then all of a sudden they're the ones who are labeled as undesirable, and they become the target of being separated, as opposed to the perpetrators that they've reported. So it's almost like being an at-will employee. If your boss doesn't like you, your manager doesn't like you, they can say you're a troublemaker, you're not a good team player, you're not competent, you're non-compliant, you're insubordinate, all that same kind of terminology that we see in the private sector. To get rid of people that maybe are a champion of a cause, but the boss doesn't want to hear that. So they find all this other excuses for terminating you.
And
So
the tactic is, as a commander, I've seen this done. Commanders don't like somebody. Oh, they were late for PT this morning. Oh, something must be going on. Command referral to behavioral health, because they know they're going to get diagnosed with an adjustment disorder.
So it's like selective enforcement of regulations that can be weaponized against whistleblowers, like that sort of situation. It sounds like. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we know that all too well, right, Polly?
Too sad. Yeah.
Yeah. No, Bali's great at summarizing things. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour. And I always try to be mindful of the time, because sometimes I get engaged in the conversation and I forget to watch the clock. But I really do appreciate this conversation tonight. Hopefully we did record this, and Paul will edit and get this online for us. Just as a reminder, December is what we call our holiday party. So we kind of make it an open night of discussion. We don't pick an agenda. We encourage your ugly sweater wearing, favorites, fuzzy slippers, or a cocktail, and to sit back, and we kind of just use that as a night of chit chat, and we'll sort of get that out. I know we're coming up. Usually we're the fourth Tuesday, but maybe we'll go next month to the 16th, because we also have a members meeting that night. So we merge them for those of you who track our membership, our members, we merge kind of tonight is usually a members meeting. I think we'll do that next month so that we're staying away from Christmas week. So if I don't talk to some of you or see you before that, happy Thanksgiving, and know that I'm grateful for those of you who join us and have become part of our community. So thank you and enjoy your holidays.